The morning the courtroom filled with reporters, murmurs, and the rustle of legal briefs, nobody expected it to end the way it did. They knew the case would spark headlines. Wealth, scandal, a young man who seemed to believe the world bent to his will. But what nobody anticipated was how completely everything would unravel once the judge took her seat, and the defendant, 23-year-old Grayson Ellington, walked in with a grin that didn't belong in any courtroom, much less one prepared to decide his fate. The camera crews weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop the hallway from being a circus. The courthouse staff had to push people back just to get through. One reporter whispered to another, "His father's going to buy his way out of this, just watch." Another muttered, "Kid, never worked a day in his life, probably thinks probation is beneath him." But inside the courtroom, things felt different, more fragile, less predictable. The judge, the Honorable Margaret Hollies, was known statewide for the same two qualities: fairness and a very low tolerance for nonsense. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a no-nonsense bun, and her glasses rested low on her nose as if she were constantly evaluating whether the world made any sense at all. Beside her bench, the American flag stood tall, its fabric barely shifting in the draft from the old courthouse vents. She'd presided over everything from homicide to petty fraud, but something about this case had her jaw set harder than usual. Because this time the entire courtroom could feel the imbalance: wealth versus responsibility, influence versus accountability. And Grayson, he treated the entire process like an inconvenience. The bailiff announced, "All rise." Everyone stood. The judge entered. And on the defense side, Grayson leaned back in his chair, hands folded behind his head, as though the sentencing hearing was nothing more than a delay before his evening plans. His attorney, Jonathan Pierce, leaned toward him, whispering sharply, "Grayson, sit up. Now." But the young man only smirked, lowering his hands slowly, casually, like someone who'd already decided the outcome didn't matter. Judge Hollies scanned the room, noting the spectators, the Ellington family sitting in the second row, his father, billionaire real estate mogul Charles Ellington, looking worn and frustrated, his mother, Patricia, clutching a tissue tightly, though she hadn't yet shed a tear, and his younger sister, Ava, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. They looked like a picture of a family beginning to realize money could soften many things, but it couldn't erase damage, not emotional and not legal. The judge spoke crisply, "You may be seated." Everyone sat. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Lena Morales, stood, smoothing the sleeves of her dark blazer. She was mid-30s, sharp-minded, and had built her career on an unshakable belief that justice should not bend just because someone's bank account was large enough to build an empire. Today, that belief would be tested more than she realized. Morales stepped forward, voice steady. "Your Honor, we are here today for the sentencing of Mr. Grayson Ellington, who has been convicted by a jury of his peers on 3 counts: reckless endangerment, obstruction of justice, and leaving the scene of an accident resulting in serious bodily injury." The judge nodded but didn't speak. Morales continued, "The victim, 19-year-old Ethan Carter, is still recovering. He may never fully regain the use of his left leg. He is unable to resume college this semester. His medical bills continue to grow, though the Ellington family has begun paying them." The mention of the victim shifted the room's energy. Reporters leaned forward. Ethan's mother, seated quietly in the back row, dabbed her eyes with a trembling hand. Morales pressed on, her voice gaining force. "During and after the trial, the defendant has shown no remorse. None. He left the injured victim on the side of the road. He tampered with evidence, and throughout the proceedings he behaved as though the courtroom were beneath him." At this, the judge glanced over her glasses toward Grayson, who simply lifted a shoulder in a half-shrug, smirk intact. His attorney closed his eyes briefly, as though asking silently for divine intervention. Morales concluded, "Given the defendant's total lack of accountability, the state respectfully recommends the maximum sentence allowable." Judge Hollies nodded again. "Thank you, Ms. Morales." The judge then turned to the defense. "Mr. Pierce." Pierce stood, buttoning his jacket. He had represented many wealthy clients before, but this case felt like trying to drag a storm into behaving. Your Honor, my client fully acknowledges the severity of the situation. A sudden, sharp sound cut him off. A laugh. Not a friendly one. Not a nervous one. A deliberate, unrestrained laugh bursting from Grayson Ellington's mouth. He didn't even try to hide it. He rubbed his forehead, still chuckling, as though the proceedings were absurd, ridiculous beneath him. The courtroom froze. Silence became absolute. Defense Attorney Pierce whispered harshly, "Grayson, stop. Stop right now." But Grayson just shook his head, murmuring under his breath, "Maximum sentence, what a joke." Judge Holly's brows lifted slowly, dangerously. "Mr. Ellington," she said, her tone low and taut, "is something amusing?" He didn't answer. His father did, standing abruptly in the gallery. "Your Honor, please, my son. He doesn't understand the seriousness." The judge raised one finger without looking at him. "Sit down, Mr. Ellington, now." Charles Ellington sank back into his seat, jaw clenched, the reality of the judge's authority finally overpowering his instinct to take charge. Judge Hollies leaned forward. "Let the record show that the defendant laughed during sentencing." A ripple spread through the courtroom, shock mixed with something else, the sense that this moment had consequences. The judge's tone hardened. "Mr. Pierce, if your client cannot control himself, I will have him removed and proceed without him." Pierce swallowed. "Grayson," he hissed again, "look at me, you need to stop." But Grayson wasn't listening. His eyes were distant, untouchable, as though he were floating above the realities that governed everyone else's lives. Judge Hollies watched him carefully, studying him with the precision of a surgeon about to make the first incision. "Very well," she finally said, voice cool. "The court will take a brief recess." The gavel struck sharply. Reporters scrambled out the doors. The bailiff approached the defense table. The judge disappeared into her chambers. And for the first time that morning, the Ellington family looked truly afraid. As the courtroom emptied slightly, the tension in the air thickened. Charles Ellington turned toward his son, voice low and strained. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" But Grayson only grinned wider. "Relax, Dad. You really think she's going to put me in prison? Look at us. Look at this family. She's not going to destroy her career over sending me away." His father closed his eyes, feeling a pain deeper than anger, shame. "You have no idea what's coming," he whispered. Across the room, Prosecutor Lena Morales watched the Ellingtons closely, her arms crossed. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't surprised either. She had seen this behavior in defendants before, though usually not defendants with $40,000 watches and private drivers waiting outside. But the same entitlement ran through them like a current. She hoped Grayson might show some sign of humanity before sentencing. Instead, he'd handed her the clearest argument for maximum punishment she could have asked for. In the back of the courtroom, Ethan Carter's mother leaned against a bench, tears welling in her eyes. A victim advocate rested a hand on her shoulder, whispering, "He doesn't get to laugh at you. He doesn't get to win." But grief doesn't separate easily from fear. She whispered back, "People like him don't go to prison, not really." Outside the courtroom doors, the reporters were already shouting theories into their microphones. A producer called out, "Get a clip of the attorney when they come out. Ask about the laugh." Another reporter practiced her line. "In a jaw-dropping moment, the defendant laughed during sentencing." But inside the courthouse walls, beyond the press frenzy, the real battle was forming, not just between prosecution and defense, but within the judge herself. Because a laugh wasn't just disrespect. It was a declaration. And Judge Margaret Hollies wasn't the kind of woman who let declarations go unanswered. When the recess ended and the courtroom filled again, the air felt heavier. Something had shifted, a collective recognition that the hearing had moved beyond standard legal procedure. This was now about principle, about public trust, about whether justice could hold its ground against wealth and arrogance. When Judge Hollies returned to the bench, she radiated a quiet intensity. She didn't immediately speak. She waited until every person in the room sat, every whisper died down. Finally, Mr. Pierce, does your client have anything he wishes to say before sentencing resumes? Pierce cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor, my client would like to address the court. The judge nodded. Proceed. Pierce turned to Grayson. Stand, he whispered. Grayson rose lazily, hands slipping into his pockets. Mr. Ellington, Judge Holly said firmly, remove your hands from your pockets. This is a court of law, not a social gathering. Grayson obeyed, but reluctantly, like a child forced to apologize for something they didn't believe was wrong. Now, the judge continued, you may speak. Grayson inhaled, the smirk almost returning before he crafted a thin veneer of respect. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth, rehearsed, but hollow, I understand the gravity of the situation. I never intended for anyone to get hurt, and I'm sorry that the accident happened. There was a cold pause. Ada Morales raised an eyebrow. The victim's mother looked down at her hands. Even his attorney winced slightly. Because everyone could hear it, nothing in his tone resembled remorse. Grayson went on, I think the media has blown all of this way out of proportion, and I believe I've already paid enough, socially, emotionally, and financially. He glanced at his father, who looked like he was aging by the second. And Grayson concluded with the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no. I trust this court will be fair and see that prison isn't necessary in my situation. Silence. Then almost too quickly, Judge Holly said, Thank you, sit down. Grayson did, slouching immediately. His attorney whispered, You were supposed to follow my notes. But Grayson just replied, Relax, she's not going to do anything. The turning point. Ada Morales rose. Your Honor, the state requests permission to respond. Permission granted, the judge said. Morales walked into the center of the room, her voice controlled but carrying a bite. Mr. Ellington says he believes he already paid enough. Let's revisit what enough means. She turned slightly toward the gallery, not addressing them, but letting her words sink into their space. A 19-year-old kid, Ethan Carter, was struck by Mr. Ellington's vehicle. Mr. Ellington did not check if Ethan was alive. He did not call 911. He drove away. He later had the vehicle cleaned, suppressing evidence. Grayson shifted uncomfortably for the first time. Morales continued, her tone tightening. The defendant sees consequences as inconveniences, not responsibilities. He believes money cures everything. He believes his lineage protects him. And today he laughed, while his victim's family sat feet away. She paused deliberately. And that laugh tells us everything we need to know. Judge Hollis watched her intently. Morales pressed on, lowering her voice. Your Honor, justice does not mean punishment only when it's convenient for the privileged. Justice means accountability, regardless of last names or bank accounts. The state stands firm in its recommendation, maximum sentencing. She returned to her table. The judge took a careful breath. Thank you, Ms. Morales. Behind the defense table, Pierce stood again, hands clasped tightly. Your Honor, my client is young. He has a future, one that imprisonment would permanently destroy. He's willing to participate in community service, restitution, anything the court deems helpful to the victim. But a prison sentence. The judge cut in. Mr. Pierce, I have heard your arguments. He nodded, defeated. The courtroom fell quiet again. The judge turned her attention to Grayson directly. Mr. Ellington, stand. He stood. He still looked confident, too confident, though the edges of that confidence were fraying. Mr. Ellington, the judge said slowly, a sentencing hearing is not simply a formality. It is not a negotiation. It is the moment the court weighs your actions, your intentions, and your behavior, including your conduct here today. The gallery held its breath. You laughed. Her voice dropped sharper. You laughed at the gravity of your own crimes. You laughed at the suffering of another human being. You laughed at the judicial process itself. Grayson swallowed. His father buried his face in his hands. Morales watched without blinking. Your laughter, Judge Hollis said, was not merely disrespectful. It demonstrated a profound lack of remorse, a lack of empathy, a lack of understanding about what it means to live in a society where actions have consequences. She paused. And consequences, she added, are not optional. Grayson's smirk faded entirely. A sudden shift. Before continuing, the judge looked toward the back of the courtroom. Is the victim's family present? Ethan's mother stood shakily. Yes, Your Honor. Would you like to speak? Her voice was barely audible. I would. You may approach the podium, the judge instructed. She did slowly, clutching a small photograph of Ethan as a child. When she spoke, the tremor in her voice was felt by everyone. My son, he's trying so hard to get better. He was supposed to go back to school next month. He can't. He wakes up in pain. He asks why someone would leave him there, and I don't know how to answer. Tears slid down her cheeks. He didn't deserve this, and he definitely didn't deserve to be laughed at. Her voice broke. I just want fairness, real fairness. When she returned to her seat, the courtroom was silent except for the faint echo of her words. The final arguments. Judge Hollis folded her hands. Mr. Ellington, she said, before I pass sentence, I want to give you one last opportunity. He looked at her, uncertainty flickering for the first time. If you have anything else you wish to say, anything genuinely remorseful, anything that truly reflects understanding, this is your moment. All eyes fell on him. His attorney whispered desperately, say something, mean it. But entitlement is a cage, and Grayson had never learned how to step outside it. He lifted his chin and said, I've said what I needed to say. A murmur rolled through the courtroom. His father's face went pale. Morales exhaled, a single relieved breath. The judge nodded once, as if she'd expected this. Very well, she said softly. Sentencing will proceed. And with those words, the final act began. The courtroom felt frozen in time. Even the old wooden benches seemed to hold their breath as Judge Hollis prepared to deliver a sentence that would either reinforce or shatter the Ellington family's certainty that money insulated them from consequences. The judge straightened a stack of papers, though everyone knew she didn't need them. She'd made up her mind long before the recess. Grayson's laugh had only carved the path deeper. Mr. Ellington, she began, please remain standing. He did, shoulders tense now, confidence flickering like a faulty light. This court has weighed the facts. It has considered the evidence, the testimony, the statements of both counsels, and the behavior you have displayed throughout this trial. Her voice was steady, controlled but firm. Your actions on the night of the accident were reckless. Your decisions afterward were criminal. And your conduct in this courtroom, she paused, letting the weight settle, has been egregiously disrespectful. Grayson bit his lip, a small attempt at composure. Judge Hollis continued, you come from privilege, you come from influence, but privilege does not negate responsibility. Influence does not absolve guilt. In fact, your background makes your behavior even more troubling. You had access to every resource, legal, educational, societal, to make better choices, and you chose none of them. His attorney bowed his head. Morales looked resolute. His parents gripped each other's hands tightly. Therefore, the judge said, her voice sharpening, on the charge of reckless endangerment, I sentence you to 2 years in state prison. On the charge of obstruction of justice, I sentence you to 3 additional years. And on the charge of leaving the scene of an accident resulting in serious bodily injury, I sentence you to 5 years. There was a collective gasp. Even Morales widened her eyes slightly. She had expected a firm sentence, but not this firm. Grayson blinked rapidly. What did you say? The judge held her ground. The sentences will run consecutively, 10 years total. The shock was absolute. His mother sobbed openly. His father stood whispering, "Your Honor, please." "Sit down, Mr. Ellington," the judge commanded. "Your son is an adult, and this is his sentence, not yours." Pierce whispered, pale, "Grayson, don't speak, don't." But Grayson exploded. "This is insane. 10 years for an accident. I'm not going to prison. Do you know who I am?" The judge lifted her gavel slightly, but didn't strike it. "Mr. Ellington," she said, her voice cutting like ice, "your name, your status, and your wealth are irrelevant here. This is a court of law, and in this courtroom, accountability applies equally." "No," Grayson said, shaking his head in disbelief. "No, this can't be real. You can't do this. You can't." The bailiff approached, slow but steady. His father's voice cracked. "Son, please don't make this worse." But Grayson had never been taught how to lose. Not a game, not an argument, and certainly not his freedom. He turned to the judge, fury overtaking fear. "You're doing this because I laughed, because I didn't grovel. This whole thing is a joke." The judge finally struck her gavel. "Order." But Grayson was spiraling. "My father will appeal this. You won't get away with it, you." "Grayson," Pierce grabbed his arm. Stop right now." The bailiff moved closer. Judge Hollis spoke over the chaos. "Mr. Ellington's outburst will be added to the record. Sentencing stands." The gallery watched, stunned, as the reality of the moment crystallized. The millionaire's son had expected immunity. Instead, he had earned prison. Aftermath in the courtroom. The bailiff reached for Grayson's wrists. "Don't touch me," he shouted, jerking away. "Sir," the bailiff warned, "do not resist." Grayson looked around desperately, seeing cameras in the hallway through the glass window, reporters leaning in, mouths open in shock. He knew this moment would be everywhere by nightfall. Humiliation washed over him like a wave. He whispered, "Dad, do something." Charles Ellington stood slowly, tears in his eyes, a man who had solved everything for his son until the one thing he couldn't. "Grayson," he whispered, voice breaking, "I can't stop this." And for the first time all day, the smirk, the arrogance, the shield of entitlement, it all cracked. Grayson's voice shrank. I didn't think she'd actually do it." His father nodded sadly. "You should have." But it was too late. The bailiff secured the handcuffs gently. "Turn around, sir." Grayson obeyed. The metallic click echoed through the courtroom like a final verdict, heavier than the gavel itself. The judge's final words. Before the bailiffs escorted Grayson away, Judge Hollis spoke one last time. "Mr. Ellington," she said, "I hope you take this time to reflect on the consequences of your actions, not just the accident, but everything that followed." He didn't look at her. "Prison will be difficult," she continued, "but it may be the place where you learn what your upbringing never taught you, that every life has value, not just your own." Silence followed her words, thick and powerful. She added, "This court is adjourned." Her gavel struck. The sound reverberated through the courtroom, through the hallway, through the lives of everyone who witnessed a moment that would become one of the most talked-about sentencings in the state. Outside the courtroom, as the doors opened, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Is the Ellington family planning to appeal? Did the laughter influence the judge? What does this mean for the victim? But the Ellingtons pushed through silently, grief and shock replacing their usual poise. Morales exited minutes later, speaking firmly. "Justice was served today. No one is above the law." She didn't linger for interviews. Inside the courthouse, Ethan Carter's mother stood with the victim advocate, tears on her cheeks. But this time they weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of relief. "It won't fix everything," she whispered, "but at least it means something." Grayson's realization. Downstairs in the courthouse holding area, the fluorescent lights hummed softly. The air was cold, sterile. The bailiff removed Grayson's jewelry and belongings. Each item clinked against a metal tray, expensive watch, wallet thick with cards, phone engraved with his initials. He stared at the tray, then at his cuffed wrists. "This can't be happening," he murmured. This is not how my life goes." But it was, and he had no one to blame but himself. A father's reflection. Outside, standing on the courthouse steps, Charles Ellington finally broke. He leaned against a column, his wife at his side, whispering, "How did it come to this?" He knew the answer. Years of shielding, years of excuses, years of solving consequences instead of allowing his son to face them. "We failed him," Charles whispered. His wife nodded, trembling. "We did. But failure doesn't erase responsibility." And the judge had made sure Grayson would learn what they never taught him. The closing narration. In the end, the story of the millionaire's son who laughed during sentencing became more than a headline. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder that character isn't built by wealth, that actions have consequences, real ones, and that the justice system, though imperfect, sometimes stands tall when it matters most. For Grayson Ellington, 10 years of lost freedom would become the cost of a lifetime of unchecked entitlement. For the victim's family, the road ahead would still be long, still painful, but now, at least, the scales had begun to balance. And for Judge Margaret Hollies, it was another case on her docket, yet one that reaffirmed why she wore the robe. Not for power, not for prestige, but to ensure that no laugh, no matter how arrogant, could silence the truth.